All right, let's go through an introduction to the Victorians. The sun never sets on the British Empire, boasted the Victorians, and it was true. With holdings around the globe, from Africa to India, from New Zealand to Canada, it was always daytime in some part of the vast territory ruled by Great Britain. The phrase also captured the attitude of the era. During the reign of Queen Victoria, Britain was a nation in motion, at the height of its power, both politically and economically. Abroad, Britain dominated world politics. At home, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. For those with wealth and influence, Victoria's reign was a time not only of change, but of prosperity. Yet, large segments of the population suffered greatly during this period, leading many writers to criticize the rapid pace and materialism of the age and the injustices that resulted. Queen Victoria, for whom the period is named, was just 18 years old when she came to the throne in 1837. She went on to rule for more than 60 years, longer than any English ruler before her. Victoria's devotion to hard work and duty, her insistence on proper behavior, and her support of British imperialism became the hallmarks of the Victorian period. Victoria knew that previous monarchs had clashed with Parliament, and she realized that the role of royalty had to change. She accepted the concept of a constitutional monarchy in which she gave advice rather than orders, and yielded control of day-to-day governmental affairs to a series of very talented prime ministers. When the Queen withdrew from politics and went into mourning in 1861, after the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, the position of prime minister became even more important. The Industrial Revolution had already transformed Britain into a modern industrial state by the time Victoria took the throne. By 1850, England boasted 18,000 cotton mills and produced half of the world's iron. Progress also brought new inventions such as the telephone, light bulb, radio, and automobile, and advances in science and medicine, like the work of British surgeon Joseph Lister. Building on the ideas of Louis Pasteur, Lister developed standards for keeping hospitals clean and germ-free, vastly increasing the survival rates of his patients. Some writers expressed enthusiasm for the material advantages afforded by the industrial age. Others were appalled by the materialism of the Victorian upper and middle classes, an attitude they considered tasteless, joyless, and destructive of community. While the middle class grew more prosperous, conditions for the poor became intolerable. Factory workers, including many children, spent long hours toiling for low wages under harsh and dangerous conditions. In the 1840s, unemployment soared in England, and the Great Famine devastated Ireland. Families without income and starving Irish immigrants crowded into England's already squalid slums. Though Parliament enacted many important reforms during this period, change came slowly. The Great Reform Act of 1832 expanded suffrage, or the right to vote, to wealthy middle-class men. Before this law, only about 5% of Britain's population had the right to vote. In 1833, slavery was abolished in the British Empire, and the first laws restricting child labor were enacted. In decades that followed, laws were passed establishing public schools, improving sanitation and housing, legalizing trade unions, easing harsh factory conditions, and giving working class men the right to vote. So there's a glimpse at the British Empire in 1880. You can see they expand to nearly every continent. We've got Southwest Asia, Australia, Africa, South America, North America. Confronted with the harsh realities of the Victorian world, many poets followed the lead of the Romantics, focusing on idealized love and the awe-inspiring beauty of nature. But some poets, especially later in the century, addressed contemporary issues such as spiritual doubt and the loss of old customs, traditions, and values due to the pressures of industrialization and scientific discoveries. While many poets retreated from the modern life, novelists embraced the issues of the age. Victorian novels were weighty affairs, quite literally, so weighty that they typically had to be divided into 3 volumes. Keen-eyed, sharp-witted writers probed every corner of society, from the drawing room to the slums, exposing problems and pretensions. Victorian readers craved this realism. They wanted to meet characters like themselves and the people they knew. They wanted to learn more about their rapidly changing world. Families often spent evenings reading aloud to each other, laughing at the adventures of Charles Dickens' Mr. Pickwick and his oddball friends, or sighing over Heathcliff and Catherine's doomed romance in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. In the next century, modernist writers would pick up the torch from their Victorian predecessors and grapple with issues the Victorians could not have imagined. And here's a rundown of the timeline from this period. So we've got 1835 to 1905, basically running the span of time from Victoria becoming queen to the day that she died in 1901. Some important moments of note here: the Irish potato famine in 1845, the publishing of Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights by the Bronte sisters, Prince Albert's death in 1861, the publication of Great Expectations, the first installment by Dickens in 1860, Victoria becoming the Empress of India in 1876, so that's going to expand Great Britain's control there in Southwest Asia. The publication of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And then the Third Reform Act here, 1884. This was a big deal because at this point, nearly all adult males were able to vote.